today with us Bryan Tew as the last speaker for today. Bryan is a thought leader in the field of business agility and organizational steerment and measurement. Our guest excels at helping organizations transform and adopt better way better ways of working. Sorry. I now turn the floor to Bryan to take you on a journey with him towards business agility. Bryan?
Thanks, Isam. Hello, everyone. Let me share my screen. So excited to be with you. I know it is the end of the day. You're probably all exhausted. So I figured that in our session today, we'll actually share some specific tips and patterns on how you can accelerate your journey to business agility. So I hope this will be well worth your time, and then you can get to your evening activities. As Sam mentioned, my name is Bryan Tew. It's a very odd last name in English. It's a commonly used word, and a number is just something I have to deal with. But I am coming from from the United States in the state of Utah. And here at Agility Health, we do offer these services to the community, the Enterprise Business Agility Strategy model, which I'll share a little bit about, the Agility Health platform for measuring your teams and your business agility journey, as well as Agile video. So if you're interested in any of those areas, certainly happy to share more. But I figured I'd start today with a little story, which maybe many of you can relate to. In fact, going back several years, I was leading an Agile transformation for a large financial services company with hundreds of teams. And as we were implementing Agile, we found that there were some significant productivity benefits. And things were going pretty well, teams were happy, until they found that there were many things outside of their control that they couldn't do anything about. For instance, they had competing priorities, they had changing priorities, they had injected work. They oftentimes needed specific clarity on strategy elements they didn't have access to. And we knew that there were people talking about things like portfolio management, but we didn't really see what they were doing. They didn't really connect with the Agile teams. In fact, then we also saw that teams were delivering features that sometimes missed the mark completely. Sometimes they'd miss on a deliverable or initiative, and it wasn't what the customer wanted. And we knew that there were people talking about the customer journey and how important it was to be customer obsessed, but we didn't really see that happening. And we certainly didn't have information to the Agile teams. And as you can probably guess, there were many different things happening around digital modernization and design thinking and leadership development and lean startup and discovery, change management and lean optimization, all of which were happening in silos or not really happening much to benefit the Agile teams. And what we realized is that all of these good things need to come together in an integrated strategy. And so if you're in a situation where maybe you have siloed initiatives or efforts happening that just aren't connected, or maybe we're not going through the right efforts to ensure that our business agility processes are moving forward, then this is where we can actually start to bring things together in an integrated way. And in this organization, the CIO of the organization decided we need to bring these initiatives and have one program that consolidated that thinking and leveraged the abilities for Agile teams and their leaders and partners to be able to leverage these benefits. And that's where I start my discussion here. I love this quote by Bill Gates: "Success today requires the agility and drive to constantly rethink, reinvigorate, react, and reinvent." As we know and has been talked about today, disruption is coming. We feel it. We've experienced it over the last year and a half, whether it's in physical changes to our environment, our customer needs and trends, innovation. All these things are going to hit us, and are we ready? And I like to think that business agility is the ability to actually be prepared for disruption. In fact, from Evan Laybourne and Sally Lada, as we have partnered together, we've worked through this common definition of business agility around the ability to adapt to change, learn and pivot, deliver at speed, and thrive in a competitive market. Isn't that what we all want, right? Absolutely. But one caution: business agility is a journey, not a destination. And as we sometimes hear, we want to be able to flip the light switch. We want to say that we're done, but in reality, we're continuously improving and optimizing. And that's the whole point of being ready for disruption, is we're continually bettering ourselves so that we can plan ahead and be ready for what's coming next. So in the spirit of measurement and growth, I'm going to share with you some of the steps of that journey. And you might want to internally just think about, on maybe a 1 to 5 scale, where are you in each of these stages of the business agility journey? You can just write that down, or just think in your own minds. In fact, we typically start with what we call team level agility, which most of us have experienced with the Agile community, really adopting Agile and the frameworks such as Scrum and Kanban, Scrumban, and so forth, and enabling cross-functional teams, and really understanding how healthy and mature are those teams and how we can enable them. So that's the first stage of the journey. And you might want to just consider, or where are we in that stage? Are we more closer to the 5, closer to the 1? But the next stage of the journey is team of teams agility. This is where we're scaling Agile and leveraging frameworks like SAFe and LESS and DAD and so forth. We're also looking at DevOps maturity, and we're really engaging leaders to help build and shape the right culture of agility. And so again, measure, where are you? Rate yourselves in your organization where we are here. But then we move into beyond the teams. We look at organizational agility, which is where we start to employ lean product development and customer-focused practices, portfolio management, and how our intake system matches our demand and capacity. We look at value stream structures. We look at digital transformation efforts. And that's where we're starting to expand beyond just the technology organization and the Agile teams into understanding how the work truly flows, back to what Evan was talking about earlier, to outcomes, or OKRs. And then we look at operational agility, which is really where we're employing talent development, innovation practices. We're looking at customer obsession, or customer seat at the table. We're looking at how do we actually partner with HR to develop our talent in an Agile focused way, and bring in agility to groups such as operations and finance, legal, audit, sales, marketing, and so forth. And right where you are in this area, right? But then, of course, we move into what we call enterprise business agility, which this is where we are prepared to anticipate customer needs. We can disrupt before being disrupted, and we can sustain what we call a learning culture. Now, this is not necessarily a linear path. We can do certain things in these areas. In fact, what I'm going to share with you next are some of the areas that you might want to consider investing in as we start to move down that and accelerate our business agility path. This is what we call the Business Agility Strategy model. And not to overwhelm you here, but there are different competencies here, and I'll just quickly walk through some of these for you. Basically, starting at the first pillar, which we call customer seat at the table, truly understanding your customer and employing discovery and validation practices, really to solve 2 problems. Are we validating that we're solving the right problems for our customers? Truly important. Leveraging lean startup techniques, design thinking, and so forth, but also employing validation practices around, are we solving the problem the right way? You might be solving the right problem, but if your solution doesn't resonate with your customers, it's still not going to win. And then, of course, how do we continually engage and put a customer focus at the forefront of what we're doing? We then move to lean portfolio management, where we look at strategic intent and outcome alignment, utilizing strategic annual and quarterly OKRs. But also, how do we align our capacity to demand? It's interesting, I've yet to meet a large company that truly understands their capacity, right? They all know their demand, it's a lot, but how do we align that? And looking at adaptive funding and governance processes. Now, tightly aligned with that is what we call organizational structure and team design, which is basically building virtual structures around how do we get the right people to work together through value streams, release trains, and ensuring that the work can flow, but also looking at role agility. How do we build out the right roles to support the Agile processes, and especially looking at any gaps that we might have. And of course, enablement teams that enable teams to be able to do more than what they're currently doing today. And of course, Agile framework and mindset is a big part of this. This is where most organizations start as we look at this model. But it's not just Agile for technology teams and scaling Agile. It's also how do we employ Agile in business settings and apply the agility practices that really make a difference there, which are going to look very different, right? And the leadership and culture area to support all of this, certainly employing leadership agility, looking at how do we transition managers into roles where they can actually support the culture of agility and understand how to recognize and support and look at performance areas for their teams. And then how do we as leaders build what's called a culture of agility? Now, friends, this is all good. However, this last pillar is kind of a capstone to this, which is how do you make it stick? And that's what I'll spend a couple of minutes on here today. How do you build internal change agents? How do you continuously measure and build growth patterns for your organization and for your teams and individuals? And how do we focus on the Agile talent development? Now, below this, we do have our seventh pillar, which is technology agility. And of course, this supports all these different areas. It's usually the biggest pillar, but there are lots of different initiatives happening usually to ensure that this is getting done. But a big part of business agility, obviously, with DevOps, your vision architecture, your technical excellence. And finally, there's this aspect of how do we measure? What metrics should we put in place to know that we're actually moving in the right direction? Now, friends, what I'd like to offer you today is an ability to actually see where we're doing or how we're doing in our business agility journey. And that's what we call the EBA radar, a way to actually assess with senior leaders, whether it's part of an enterprise or even a business unit or a portfolio, how are we doing in each of these areas and which are the areas that we might need to invest in? What are our gaps? Now, you'll be able to see specific alignment across those leaders, but also how can we really focus on the right strategy to improve and move down that business agility journey. Now, if you're interested in just trying this out, please contact us here at info@agilityhealthradar.com. We'd love to help you leverage the abilities of the EBA assessment, which has been a tremendous tool to utilize with organizations across the world. However, to go just one step deeper, I'm going to share you a few techniques on how you might be able to accelerate that business agility journey within your organizations, even within your teams. It's a three-step process that we employ. First of all, starting with how do we learn? Now, as we've noticed over COVID, it's been hard to keep the same training regimen that organizations have been used to with face-to-face, really hands-on training. So how do we scale learning and talent development with virtual and on-demand learning? Well, you might want to check out agilevideos.com, which is a great platform for how we might get that on-demand learning. But then regardless of what approaches you use, how do we make sure that people understand what their expectations are, what their responsibilities are, and how they can leverage the new ways of working to flow outcomes? And then we look at measure. How do you measure your current state and develop targeted quarterly growth plans so we specifically know how we'll improve? Now, you may want to leverage AgilityHealth radars. And there are other practices certainly as well here, but certainly a great way to understand where are we and what do we need to do to get better. The third step is how do you actually enable growth? Growth has to be intentional. It doesn't just organically happen for most people because we're so busy. So how do we provide the time, the space, and enable teams and individuals to grow with targeted and role-specific resources? Now, you might want to leverage the AgilityHealth Growth Portal, where resources are specific around the competencies within roles, but also within the teams on how they might improve their practices. Combine this together, and this is where we start to really accelerate, really accelerating our maturity, our performance, and our ability to bring business agility to all levels of the organization. Now, to specifically look at how do we help individuals, this might be helpful for you. Ultimately, there are 4 quadrants of how we develop talent. And certainly, as we talked about learning, we want a role-specific learning roadmap. What are the things that are going to be the biggest bang for the buck for them to understand and take on as they progress in their role? But coupled with that is, how do we measure? How do we understand where are they today? What competencies are they excelling in? Which competencies do they have gaps in? What mentorship or what help do they need to improve in those areas? And then from there, that's where the growth comes in, the enabling self-learning and growth through the right recommendations, the right resources, the right tooling to really help in that specific role. And then what we always suggest is have some type of mentorship program. Part of that might include a guild or community of practice, but people they can pair with as they get up to speed or as they improve in certain areas or learn new skills. So they can go through this process of show me how to do that, pair with me, and then enable me. And this 4-step program has really been helpful to enable Agile talent in all of these different roles and many others. Now, friends, finally, I do want to share with you where you might want to get started with Measure and Grow, because there are different levels of measurement. And what we would always suggest is what's most important for you to understand, for you to measure and get data around. What are the problems that you're trying to solve? For instance, we might be trying to look at how do we measure where we are with our business agility rollout, which is where that EBA radar comes in. Or you might be interested in measuring how are we doing at this team of teams level. It might be around our product health, it might be around our portfolio, it might be around DevOps. We might want to measure how we're doing there and understand how we can move forward and improve. Or you might want to look at the team level. How are we doing at a team level that can then roll up and provide not only teams with insights on what they can do to improve, but leaders with patterns and hearing the voice of their teams on what they need to do to really help the organization. Or you might look at that individual role level and understand how are the different roles, the Agile roles doing, where are they today, and where do they need to improve. Now, friends, if you're interested in learning more about any of these areas, let me just share with you that you're certainly welcome to try out the Agile videos as shown here. You're certainly welcome to try out our EBA assessment. Give it a shot and see how it might work for your organization. See where you are today in your business agility journey. And if you'd like to download these slides that I'm sharing as a reference, then this will be available later on tonight and certainly tomorrow at agilityhealthradar.com. And we would just ask for a short eval on what you've gained from this session. And friends, with that, I will open it up to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bryan. It was we have questions. First one is, according to you, the fact that everything is done in silos, does it mean that organizations are not working well?
I would say it's not necessarily that they're not working well. I would say they're not optimized. And that's where some of the problems come in, even going back to that experience I shared, where if you have different initiatives happening, they might be really good initiatives, but if they're not talking to each other, if they're not leveraging the learning that they're having in these different areas, then there's probably growth and development that's left on the table. You could probably be more optimized. Now, I'll just share with you quickly on that note that in this organization, and this is the pattern we utilize with our clients in leveraging EBA, certainly having a sponsorship team that can hold these different groups accountable and bring them together, call these different tracks of teams, if you will, where there's a specific team that owns, for instance, portfolio management. They might own the customer seat at the table. They might own the organizational and team design. These are leaders who come together to actually provide work in how that's progressing, but then most importantly, sharing those lessons learned, leveraging those practices and patterns across all the different areas of the organization. That's where you're going to get the most benefit. And so I would definitely say that that's where optimization is important. And regardless of how you're employing these different techniques, you should have an integrated strategy. That's the takeaway with that section is, what is your integrated strategy that leverages design thinking, that leverages portfolio management, that leverages customer seat and all those different areas?
Thank you. Another question is there a time to align these gears? Sorry.
Yes, in fact, as I kind of went through with you very quickly, it's actually good to assess where are we with each of those different gears, with team agility, with team of teams agility. That is actually part of what I might consider a organizational retrospective around agility. You could do this as part of a strategy session, but just recognizing where are we overall. And you might even look at different parts of the organization, because you might have more areas of maturity in different areas. But I find that that's just a worthwhile exercise to go through. Not only how are we doing, but how satisfied are we in each of those areas? Are we satisfied with the efforts that we're doing in maybe that organizational agility? And if not, what more do we need to do? That's where we might build a roadmap or strategy around what do we need to do moving forward, and then break that up into quarterly chunks. I love to think about business agility strategy similarly to how we think about agile teams. Rather than having 2 or 3 week sprints, we're looking at a sprint more of like a quarter time box. So we're looking at what are the business agility practices, patterns that we're going to bring in and adopt over the next quarter that can really help us move the needle and accelerate our journey.
I was on mute, sorry. Thank you for your answer. It was very clear. A question from Christoph. The fact that it was that way historically, does that mean that companies can't start directly by organizational agility or the last step?
And that's where I'd mentioned that it's not necessarily linear. Yes, absolutely. We've actually worked with many companies that have started with organizational agility because that's their biggest problem to solve. And then they might go back to team agility and start leveraging agile practices. You might start with operational agility because that's where the biggest challenges are. And that's okay. Ultimately, we want to be able to meet organizational leaders with where they are. What are the biggest challenges they're trying to solve? However, we do have a suggested pattern for adoption. And that's where we would always look at what is the organizational strategy? Where are we going? Who do we want to be in our future? And as Evan Campbell talked about a couple of talks ago, leveraging something like OKRs to really reinforce what our strategy is and what outcomes we're trying to achieve going forward is actually a very good place to start if you haven't started anywhere. And then you start to look at how do we leverage the right teams to perform against those outcomes. But that is where let's find where the biggest challenges are and start there. That's typically the best place to start, and that's where we'll build the most trust with leaders. Thank you.
Thank you. A question from Uwe. Is the business agility journey represents a start and an end, or is it not ordered? Because I think sometimes you need to start with the management at the C level.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's a good thing to bring out. I'll just go back here because ultimately there is no end, right? And sometimes the start has been happening for years, just in small little micro steps. I would say the journey, because it's not a destination, as I mentioned, it's a journey. We're really not looking for when are we ended or when are we there, when have we made it. We're looking for how much have we improved. That's the key, my friends. Let's look at how we've improved over time. How are we doing this year compared to last year, for instance? How are we doing this quarter compared to last quarter? How are we doing now compared to where we were 3 years ago? If you're seeing measurable activity and success and growth, then you should be proud of that, that we're actually moving forward. How much improvement is where you might want to look at, are we satisfied with that? If have we moved the needle to the point where we're happy with where we are today, we want to continue to optimize, or is it not enough? So that would be the best advice I can provide, is don't look at when we're there or when we're done. Look at how much have we improved and how much more do we expect to improve by leveraging new and more effective practices.
Forgot the mute again. A question from Alexi. Who leads the assessment? A coach, the teams themselves, managers?
Yeah, great question. So if you would like to leverage the assessment, this is actually a great thing for a coach to do. However, I would put this caveat in place, and that is, depending on the level of leaders that you're bringing in to assess. So for instance, we sometimes do this with the C-suite of executives, and they would actually measure, where are we from an enterprise perspective? And I would really need someone who can facilitate the conversation with that type of a leader, which isn't typically a team level Agile coach, right? It might be more of an enterprise or a leadership coach. So that certainly makes a difference. However, I might be able to leverage one of my internal leaders who's maybe a champion around business agility. That would also be a great person to be able to facilitate a session like this. But it doesn't really matter who facilitates regarding the role. It's more about, can they be able to facilitate the right conversations and bring out the right points through going through the process. Now, the nice thing is the assessment itself is very easy to walk through. They're going to answer some questions. You're going to be bringing in some educational information about each of these different areas so that they have the right context. And then it's just a matter of, let's look at our results and see what that helps us understand we need to do going forward and help to build out that strategic roadmap. By the way, if you have any if you want to get deeper into any of that, please reach out following the session. I'd love to share any additional information around how you might be able to leverage that.
This brings us to the end of the session. Thank you, Bryan. It was really lovely to have you and talking about measurement, which is something that is very important for transformations. And it was very interesting. So thank you again.
Thank you
for participation with us. And I think Jean-Yves here has sorry, I start to be tired. Has an announcement. So Jean-Yves.
Hello, everybody. So I'm not getting married. This is not the announcement I wanted to make. Ce n'est pas Je vais le faire en français.
I'm going to do it in French if you don't mind. The announcement is you can join us in the room, in the Jean-Yves room on Widow, to exchange about the day you've just went through between peers. That's something that we experienced a lot at the Business Agility Institute. Enables people to exchange on different perspectives and to enrich each other by sharing what they've learned from this different conferences that were given today. Globally, that's it. It's on Willow. I know that some people who can't go on Willow because their firewall hinders them from doing it. And for those who can, come and join, please. It was going to be interesting to exchange among yourselves. And I'll facilitate with Isam. I'll do the moderation of this session. That's it, Isam. Thank you, Jean-Yves. And which brings us to the conclusion of day one, which was today. We have been very pleased to have had with you today. It's been a long day for all of us. I hope that it got to you. Many speakers spoke about a series of theme areas within business agility. Tomorrow it goes on sorry for a few technical problems we faced. Since we're agile, we got your feedback and we're trying to put them to use to improve tomorrow. So I hope that I'll tell you, I'll say it to you, see you tomorrow for those who are interested in exchanging around theme areas that have been covered today. Go to Willow, which is in the live and present in description.